Hey guys, Moshi here, and we're back with the Shadowcraft Steel Rebellion Take 2 Draft Infographic update. So Shadowcraft is probably the craft that benefited the most with the coming of the Steel Rebellion cards, mainly because its sort of already strong mid-range shell of cards is getting even stronger with just a variety of sort of new tools that help complement them. It's already had sort of a good matchup against popular crafts like Runecraft and Portalcraft, as well as just a high density of sort of really good mid-range cards to help either control in sort of a value game if they're playing against sort of aggressive board-focused crafts, or just actually try to push board and win games against actual control crafts. So to put things in perspective, Shadowcraft probably has the most stable draft out of any other craft in Take 2, mainly because of its high density of really strong premium effects in the 4 and 5 drop slot. A thing I've said in the past is the turns 4 and 5 are sort of the most important turns in Take 2, mainly because those are your main primary Evo turns. Sort of turns 2 and 3, that's when both sides are just establishing 2 drops, 3 drops. There's not a whole lot of avenues to sort of snowball or be snowballed as long as both sides are sort of curving out. But during the Evo turns, you can play a lot of premium effects, Evo pings, board flood cards, and then one side can sort of swing the board in their favor as long as they have those sort of premium effects in the deck. But having these sort of effects in the golden legendary slot is a lot different than having them in sort of the silver and bronze slots, mainly because of sort of accessibility as well as just drafting sort of a critical mass of them instead of just relying on sort of that one premium power play in your deck. And just Shadow having a high amount of these in sort of the silver and bronze picks really propels it to sort of having some really stable, really strong drafts. Alright, first up for the Golden Legendaries, we got the Death Guard. So 1 play point Shadowcraft spell, so it doesn't actually have to make a huge impact to sort of be worth it if you can sort of weave it in on curve. And it's not too hard to sort of make use of. All you need to do is maybe play a 4 or 5 drop, and then you just plop this on, Evo it, and then crash in with that sort of drop. And then what'll happen is that'll just live, and then it'll trade with whatever you traded with, and then you sort of build your own sort of recamping or something. And that's generally fine. It's just that's sort of, if that's sort of the peak upside, then that's not, it's situational upside, and you sort of have to make it work. And additionally, another thing you can do with it is you can just place a follower on board if you're sort of neutral or winning on board, and that follower is additionally protected. Sure, that relies on being win more or being neutral on board, but that's reasonably fine as well. Just having something that's slightly more annoying to kill, it can be very annoying for your opponent to try to ping off something to sort of remove that Death Guard and then actually try to hit in again to actually finish off the follower. Additionally, it has sort of that snowball potential effect, or maybe if you have a lot of swarmy stuff or a bunch of random residual things on board, you can sort of give that sort of AoE Death Guard aura to everything, and then you can just crash in with everything, maybe trade with something really big, or just make it really sticky and really hard for your opponent to actually trade off without some really premium multi-pings or multi-ping AoE or something. So it has a really high sort of ceiling to be super good. It's not obviously immediately you just play it down in all situations, you draw Death Guard, it'll be amazing. Because if you're sort of losing the game or being snowballed, then this card doesn't really help you in that sense. So that's the main reason it's sort of down here. It can definitely be a bit higher. It's just in a lot of situations, or in general situations, it can be sort of a brick or sort of not a good card, which is why it's sort of here. Next up, we got the Baleful Necromancer. So speaking to sort of just the fanfare effect and it actually going off, it's actually really high premium despite the randomness. Most of the time you get 2 mid-range drops and maybe a low drop. You might just get 1 really big drop and then 2 really small drops. But either way, it's vomiting a ton of stats on board. It's very similar to Elder Plane Arbiter, or sort of the Abyss Summoner on board effect. But it's mainly sort of the Necromancy 12 that holds it back. Very similar to the Tartarus in the light of just high Necromancy count sort of finisher cards for Shadowcraft. It forces you to sort of draft your decks differently. You have to draft sort of less of these or rely on these cards less, and then you might not even want to draft something like an Orthrus if you want to sort of make these sort of one-of cards work, just because of their high necromancy commitment, and a lot of the times they're sort of dead. Speaking of these two, why is this one higher? They can easily just be switched, or even if you actually have sort of decks built around one of them, Tartarus is definitely sort of the better finisher. But in sort of the fallback case where these cards are vanilla, 8 play point 6/6 in general is sort of better than sort of the 2 play point that you have to commit at some point in your curve, and then the 3/3 that spawns just a vanilla card. But you can definitely value them around the same if you have actually built a deck around them. You can even value them extremely high if you sort of want to go for those big boards with either the Baleful Necromancer or the Tartarus. But otherwise, they're sort of down here, mainly just because of the consistency issue of actually getting that Necromancy thing out. I'll speak a bit to these ones later, why they're down. They're actually not down because you want to draft these sort of cards. They're mainly down just because they're sort of cards that do these jobs better. So moving on to the Ceres, it's 5 points now instead of 4, but it has the benefit of adding an Eternal Vow to your hand, as well as clashing and healing for 1 more compared to the original. The healing doesn't really matter for most crafts, but sometimes it is helpful against those sort of board-focused or aggressive crafts that try to deal a lot of chip damage in the early game and just finish you off with like Storm Reach in the late game. Just healing something from like 12 to 15 is especially potent against them, and even more if you manage to have this sort of stick for 1 turn plus, where this can heal for like 6 plus. Speaking to actually living for more than 1 turn, the clash helps sort of ensure that, as well as just being annoying to sort of trade with this in general. 3/6 with the additional clash 3, this makes it sort of like a pseudo 6/6. So everything like small on board basically can't trade with this. 2 drops, 3 drops, and even like some 4 drops, like 4/3s can't trade with this. And even if the opponent trades in with maybe like a 4/4 or 4/5, they'd only trade like sort of neutrally. And trading in with like actual big stuff, you can just complement it with ghost cards to sort of like finish them off. So it's a sort of lose-lose situation regardless of what your opponent trades into this card. So it's like just very sticky, just very nice subset of just being annoying on board, as well as that small heal for value. And then as an added bonus, you get sort of the Eternal Vow into your hand. It makes your like corpse rooms better. What this thing does is it discounts everything Shadow in your hand by 2. So you can like get the sort of constructed level combo, make your like corpse rooms or like some really big stuff actually cost 2 less, make it sort of easier to weave out, as well as just discounting 2 or 3 drops to like really easy levels where you can just weave them out as like 0 drops or 1 drops, stuff like that. That makes like your removal a bunch better and just lets you curve out very efficiently. But it's mainly just sort of like an additional freebie. You don't want to just play this on 6 after curving this out, because you won't be able to play like actual 6 drops, actual like pseudo 6 drops, and you can be tempoed out from there. But otherwise, this is a very good card. Just same as sort of the old Ceres. The old Ceres was sort of overrated, but this one is definitely a lot better. Just fitting in sort of in the 5-drop slot, being a premium healing tool, premium sort of a clear all your small stuff tool, as well as being like a pseudo evo ping. Just a lot of things you sort of want in the value 5-drop slot. So finally, we have the Anya. So this thing's actually one of the reasons Technolord's sort of up in Shadowcraft. This is probably the most premium thing you can resurrect from it. Funny how it's like resurrection and Shadowcraft ends up being the best. But looking into this card alone, 6.33, and then it summons the Roly-Poly. This thing's a 2/2 with sort of the Catalina clause, where it can only take, instead of 3 at a time, it only takes 1 at a time. And then it evos only to a 3/3, but that doesn't really matter, because as long as the 3/3 can trade in, it becomes like sort of a 3/2, and then your opponent has to commit 2 pings, 2 like split attacks to actually clear. And then after clearing, they still have to clear the Anya, otherwise it'll just spawn 1 again. As an additional benefit, it gets the Fleeting Joy into your hand. It's sort of a 1 play point, sort of a nilpotent entity kind of card where it actually reduces damage. The reduction of damage doesn't matter as much as actually having the upside of the Enhanced 9. The Enhanced 9 puts 4 random Machina cards from your deck into play, so you can like high roll your opponent having like a Mecha Wing sort of in your deck that this actually spawns. A thing to note is you actually can't spawn the Ana body off the Fleeting Joy, but just getting like some of the premium drops like Bone Drone into Robo Zombie, that's like fulfills out 9 play points on its own. So if you have these cards lurking in your deck, you get a free rush from it, as well as like free premium stuff on board. And even just having some free interaction from it, even if you can only get a Robo Zombie from it, that's still very strong. And the fact that it's just a freebie on top of just a free 1 drop, like it's a free Necromancy 1, if you have like nothing to do with it, you can just cast it for nothing. And just even if you have to go like anti-tempo of playing a 9 drop just to get a 5 drop, if you really have to interact with your opponent, it's just a free upside alongside it. And the fact that like this being sort of like a sort of better version of Catalina, as long as the Roly-Poly trades with something, it's very annoying. It can just easily run away with a game as long as you're sort of neutral or winning on board. As for changes, there's not too much. I said the Technolord, it's probably the best it can be in sort of Shadowcraft, mainly because of the premium things you can get from it. The Anya, the Robo Zombie, and the Bone Drone, those are just sort of your primary things to draft that are Machina. A thing to note is actually the Niccolo is Machina too, but that doesn't really matter as much. Maybe for like the Accelerate 3, this actually does help a lot if you can weave out a lot of Niccolos and not fall behind too much for it. The only other major change is the Osiris. I'll speak more to the sort of the 4 drops when I actually get to the bronzes, but there are actually a lot of sort of really good 4 drops in the pool that you don't have to risk or actually not getting sort of the evos from it, not getting sort of all the benefits from this card. Where this card can actually whiff, it can end up being sort of a 4.43. So you can just not risk actually taking it, actually take your like premium stuff like the Zibet and sort of fall back to your really high premium bronze 4 drops. Alright, first up for the silver picks, we got the Phantasmal Core. So this card's probably the candidate for one of the worst core cards that any craft got. It's the Machina attack doesn't really matter in Shadowcraft because they mainly only care about like a Machina followers if it matters at all. And like you don't play it for just the enhanced 7 to recover 1 Evo point. That's way too anti-tempo for that. You can just play Arena for that as well. And the rule of thumb still stands. It's only as good as sort of the secondary effect is, and the secondary effect isn't very good. The 10 shadows, you can use it to fill up like the baby necromancy conditions, but those ones will be sort of naturally filled out as long as you sort of like curve out naturally and just play a bunch of like decent value cards, decent like multi-spawn cards / last word cards. So it's mainly to sort of like fill out some sort of like late game win condition, those sort of Tartarus / Baleful Necromancer effects. What this reminds me of a lot is sort of Deathly Tyrant and the Midnight Haunt combo. You have to have very good draw order, and you have to have a lot of things line up, not be snowballed for playing like the actual like bad / dead card. But the good news is you can sort of like bank these shadows compared to something like a Midnight Haunt. It's like situational. You can definitely like draft some fun decks like sort of around it, but it's not very consistent. The good news is like there's not a lot of competition sort of in the bad Shadowcraft card slot, so you can even like draft this card here. There's no reason to sort of like draft it higher or any lower, so you can have it like hover around here. If you sort of value the Evo recovery effect, you'll still like pick up like one of these. So next up for the silver picks, we got the Deadly Dreamer. So it's a 2 play point 2/2 fighter stat line. So the only reason you're picking this card is definitely for its last words. The Deep Dream is a very strong card, very similar to something like a Puppet Room or Frontline Ramparts. And those cards were ridiculous cards in sort of Portalcraft and Swordcraft when they had them. So what the Deep Dream does is a 3 play point fanfare, summon a ghost. So that's the 1/1 rush or 1/1 storm, and they can interact with the opponent's board, interact with their face. And then for the next 3 turns, it also summons ghosts. So again, that's free interaction to your opponent's face. It's basically uninteractable chip damage, as well as just softening your opponent's followers, actually getting like free trades against your opponent's followers, like X1s that actually live on board, or help your like 2 drops, 3 drops, random residual stuff trade away against your opponent's board. It just gives you like so much control into the mid to late game, as well as like being sort of relevant to all stages of the game. As long as this thing dies, you can get the Deep Dream and actually interact with the board favorably for the next few turns. That sort of like propels this card as probably one of the best 2 drops that Shadow can draft. So last up for the silver picks, we got the Robos on me. So 5 play point 2/5 Rush Bane. It combines sort of the best of both worlds with the Netherworld Horseman and the Zealot of Silence. What this does is it sort of like pushes the Zealot of Silence down, mainly because these cards are so similar going into sort of the late game where the play point costs don't matter as much, as well as just 4 drops in the pool just being so good now that you don't have to sort of rely on sort of the vanilla sort of Zealot of Silence, where this one actually has the rush onto it, as well as the 1 defense at the cost of just 1 play point. But a thing to note is the Netherworld Horseman didn't really go down, mainly because it's still your sort of fallback 5 drops. You're trying to draft maybe these 2, and then you fall into the silver picks. It's very nice that they have sort of a silver pick 5 drop now, and then after that you sort of fall back into the medium, then the Horseman. The fact that there's only sort of 5 4 drops for 5 drops makes it all these still very desirable, whereas the 4 drop slot is definitely very contested for sort of Shadowcraft, that this one can respectfully go down. As for other changelogs in the silver slot, it's mainly the Warden. Similar to this card, like I said, there's a lot of sort of really good 4 drops in the pool that this one can just go down 1. And you might even want to consider like bumping down the Orthrus one, especially if you want to draft like one of these sort of high necromancy finisher cards. So finally, we're moving on to the bronze picks. So the Ghoul, it's very similar to sort of a Demon Eater reprint. It counts Machina cards now, so maybe you can get the Assembly Droid to actually live from the Bone Drone, and then you can actually like eat it, and it becomes a 2/2 vanilla, and it actually draws 2 like the Soul Conversion. The only reason why this card's sort of lower than the sort of Soul Conversion is you don't want to like clog up on these effects, mainly because these cards are like very anti-tempo if it lands on like standard cards, or this is just a 1/1 eat something that's evoed on board. While these effects are nice, the lower cost with these kind of effects, the better they are. Mainly because like the Soul Conversion, now you can sort of eat ghosts with them, like stuff from the Malice. That's like the constructed level combo. Like if the opponent doesn't have anything to clear, you just ping for 2 and then you draw 2 that like refills your hand after that. Similarly with stuff like the Ghostwriter or the Medium, you can just play them as like 8 drops or 6 drops, and then you can just cycle more from it. The fact that sometimes the Ghoul just struggles to weave in on curve to actually like get the value from it, or makes you like super anti-tempo for it, makes it like slightly lower. Like you don't want to like clog up on too much of these effects anyway, just because the general Shadowcraft card has like so much value attached to it that you don't need like too much card draw as well. Next up for Shadowcraft, we got a new removal tool in the form of Soul Steal. 3.1 to deal 4 is very much similar to something like a Craving Splendor. It's sort of clunky to have like a ton of these effects, even just looking at it playpoint wise. The Barrow Right can be helpful, can be a blessing, can be a curse. Mainly just cycling like really expensive stuff or stuff that's not good in a matchup and then just drawing something new. But it can actually hurt you just having stuff you're curving out with and maybe only have one or two more followers in hand, maybe like really premium effects that you're trying to save. And then the Barrow Right not being a conditional, it's a force trigger, so you actually have to discard something for it if you have something in your hand. So just because of that, as well as it being clunky compared to something like a Manifest Malice, which is 2 play points to do a very similar effect of deal 3, deal 4, is why it's sort of like down here. Otherwise, it's a very solid card. You're very happy to draft this as like a mid-tier removal in Shadowcraft. Next up for Shadowcraft, we got their Evo-specific 2-drop Ghostwriter, and this is probably a candidate for sort of the best one in the pool as well. Just the fact that it's a 2/2, sort of similar to something like a Dark Conjurer. That thing fanfared and summoned something on Evo, but this is very similar if it's sort of like played before whatever you Evo. You play it, you Evo something alongside, and you get the free Ghost. It's basically a Dark Conjurer effect, and it's like super strong. Just getting the free ping off that, and then into the late game, this is where this card especially shines, being sort of like a melancholic medium on steroids. Just 7 play point 5/5, summon 3 Ghosts. It's almost like a Mad Lance, where it can ping everything on board, ping like one thing at once, or it can even all go face, just being free chip damage, like a 5/5 that does 3 damage to the opponent's face. Like some of it can be controlled to control your opponent's board. That's like especially premium, considering Shadow wants those sort of like late game drops as well. This is flexible enough to be like a very strong like early game card as well as just a very strong late game card. So you'll be very happy to like pick multiples of these, very similar to like a lot of those Evo specific 2-drops. Last up for the bronze picks, we got the Bone Drone. This card adds a lot to Shadowcraft. I forgot the Machina tag for this, but this is Machina alongside the assembly drones that it spawns / last words into. So just split board body into Shadowcraft is very strong, just allows you to save your Sinister Sarcophaguses in hand. Just probably one of the best 4-drops in the pool now. It adds more to sort of the density 4-drops. It bumps down the Buffalo Bones and the Zealot of Silence. Just really premium on board. 5/5 Evo, 1/1. You can even split board Evo the 1/1 into the 3/3, and this will be a 3/3 that last words. It's just very annoying for your opponent to clear, so most of the time you just have like a 1/1 on board to complement your ghosts, complement like other stuff that's on board or that you'll play on board, and you can like snowball games if you're trying to be aggressive, or you can like actually control down your opponent's board if you're trying to control the board against some board flood crafts. So this is just a really excellent tool for Shadowcraft to have, and you'll be very happy to draft multiples alongside the Ghostwriter. As for the changelog, I covered most of these with like other cards like the Resentment, sort of like competition sort of in the removal slot. The Call of Void went down mainly because you don't want to pick as much hard removal, and the fact that the Silent Purge is just better sort of tech versus stuff like Portalcraft, stuff like Runecraft, or like the Moras, the Silver Automatons, the Prime Artifacts, that sort of stuff that this card's sort of valued over it. As a minor thing, it's also like Necromancy for like these sort of high-end Necromancy effects. Other than that, you can like bump the Casket down as well. It's just like floating somewhere around here, but it's actually the best it's been from like all the expansions, even with like competition sort of in the 5-drop slot. And then the Zealot went down, similar to the Buffalo Bones, with what I said with sort of the Robo Zombie, as well as just competition in the 4th drop slot. So I guess that's it for those Shadowcraft cards, and I'll see you guys in the next one.